Okay, friends. Hi, everyone. Welcome, 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 welcome. Thank you so much uh, for joining us again. Thank you so much for not being overwhelmed by anything that we're doing. Um, and this is such a and oh, welcome again to everyone. Thank you so much for introducing yourself as you enter into the room. Thank you so much for offering the land acknowledgements, indigenous names of the land that you're practicing on. Um, and thank you again for those of you who are joining for the first time. Welcome to the community. For those of you who've been joining us for other programming, for our evening talks, for our afternoon or morning practice sessions, it's so good to see you again. We have so much more to offer this month, so thank you so much. And thank you for joining us for Holy Week and for our observance of Holy Week. You know, Passover and Easter practice. And so I just wanted to just get started with just a short grounding practice. And then we'll have, after the practice, I'll say a few things. Then I'll invite Lee, who's my co-host, my co-facilitator for tonight, to come back on to talk a little more about our gathering. Okay. So, hmm, okay. So let's just begin by let's just I just invite you just to ask your body how it needs to be right now. You know, just allowing the body to have agency to be in a position that feels appropriate for you right now. So that means that you can sit up, you can lounge, you can lie down. I do not believe that there's any particular way that one has to be to practice. So just being kind to oneself. And I want to encourage you to bring your attention to just, reflecting on something that you're grateful for. This is such an incredibly important practice for us right now. We are in the midst of so much struggle, so much pain, so much discomfort. And so let's just take a moment just to bring our minds, our attention, our awareness back to something that's we're grateful for. And if you feel up to it, I encourage you to share some of this energy of gratitude down to the earth, thanking the earth for holding us, thanking this land for sheltering us, holding us. And next, I invite you to share this energy of gratitude with our breath. And as we're breathing, inhaling and exhaling, just remembering that there are so many people, so many members of our collective family who are struggling with their breath in this moment, and that we are breathing on their behalf. And we just ask our breaths to stay with us and support us during this practice and during our time together. And next, I encourage you to share this energy of gratitude out to your benefactors, your guides, your guardians, and I send this energy out to my teachers, to my elders, to my communities, to this community. I send this gratitude, this energy of gratitude out to my lineages, to my ancestors, to all the spirits and deities that are holding me, supporting me, walking with me every single day. We send this gratitude to God, to the Mother, to Allah, and finally, we turn this energy of gratitude back to ourselves and we thank ourselves. We thank our bodies, we thank our minds, we thank our complete self for showing up, for being here, for doing the work to get free. Thank you so much for your practice. And I'm going to do like an early dedication of merit. So I want to dedicate the merit, the energy of our gathering tonight at the onset, at the very beginning, to all the members of our community who are struggling right now with sickness, with, job, financial, housing insecurity, instability. I dedicate the energy of this practice to Lama Justin, who's struggling with COVID-19, to his wife as well. To all our collective family. As we move through this darkness, may the energy of this time together become a collective light that begins to light this darkness that we're moving into. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for those who are also just joining us in the room. And welcome to our Easter, Passover, and beyond, our panel discussion. Just reflecting on, really just like the rich, multi-dimensional aspects of our practice. And I think that this panel is an expression of the spirit, the heart of Bhumi Sparsha. We're not just this community of just like, hardcore Orthodox fundamentalist Buddhists. But we are a community of people coming from so many different places. And as we've been saying this whole week, like we're not saying at all that you have to be different, that you have to be other than yourself. You bring your complete self, you bring your practices, your beliefs, you bring your paths, you bring your gods, your deities into the space as well. And Dharma holds that, And I know that like this seems heretical to how many of us have understood Buddhism, but this is the spirit of inclusivity. This is the spirit of community. This is the spirit of recognizing that there are multiple ways to reach whatever we're calling the divine, the ultimate enlightenment, however we frame that. And this is really uncomfortable for people. I know we've been dialoguing about this already, and we want to continue dialoguing about this. This is really uncomfortable. This seems really, this is out of some of your experiences, but we just want to walk through this right now. Um, so having said that, I would love to invite Lee, my co-facilitator, up, and Lee is a member of our organizing committee. And this is really, and this is coming out of, this is, something that Lee really, created, and this is such a beautiful offering for us. So I'll just pass it over to Lee.
Thanks, Mama Rod. So my name is Lee Rosenberg, and I use she, her pronouns, and I live in Minneapolis, which is Dakota land here, in Ojibwe. And I just wanted to, first of all, say I'm so thrilled that we are getting to do this panel tonight, because it just feels so important for all the reasons that Lama Rod has said, but we just have so much, there's so many reasons to practice right now, and so many reasons to open our hearts, and to find like the ground to do that. And so it feels to me like it feels essential that we be not only allowed, but like really actively encouraged to bring in all the parts of ourselves, all of our heritages, all of our identities, community, all of it. So the way we got to this panel tonight was Lamarad said, I've done an Easter offering at times, and it's really beautiful, and I want to offer a Tara practice, and this is for our core organizing group. We had this conversation, and it sounded great, like, yeah, wonderful. And right as soon as I heard it, it was like, well, wait a minute, what about those of us in the community for whom Christianity might not be like a welcoming lens to bring to connect in this practice? What if it feels a little hostile, like it does, like in part, there's a part of me as a Jew, as someone who's very much been born into a very Jewish family. It's like a little piece is like, wait a minute, is that okay for me? Or what do I do with that? Like, that's a little prickly, sticky or something. And so we got to talking about it. Lamarad was generously understood right away what was coming up, and said, well, what can we do to make, to talk about this, or make an offering that's more inclusive, that includes Passover. And so as we were talking about it, it was like, oh, well, I mean, I could offer reflections on my own practice in relationship to my Judaism and my heritage, but there's a lot of us that are bringing different religious traditions to our integrating with our Buddhist practice as well. And so then the idea for the panel was born, and so that's how we got here. And I'm just really looking forward to hearing each person and what they're going to share, because it feels so alive to me. And if it's all right, I'll just share a little bit about my own practice, or my path with this. And just to say, first of all, that, in case people don't know what Passover is a big, an important Jewish holiday. And it is the story of Exodus in the Bible. And so it's the time when the Jews had been slaves in the land of Egypt and are led out as free people by Moses. And so this idea of looking for freedom, it's like it was the perfect entree for this panel as well, because it's like each of us is looking for freedom, and we're looking for freedom for ourselves and for all beings as Buddhist practitioners. So that's just, I wanted to just kind of weave that in, because this is the week that we're in for Passover as well. So just to say, like, I don't want to talk too long, but I do want to share like why this is so passionate and important for me in my practice. I grew up as a so I was telling Lamarad, I got my genetic testing done, and I'm 98% Ashkenazi Jewish. So there's just like this. That's how it is. And not only that, I was raised in a Jewish household. In my community where I grew up in Cleveland, my high school was like 40% Jewish. It's like that. So it's like so much part of me. But it's like I also found growing up that there were ways that I just, I grew up in a very secular, reform kind of Jewish household, and so it was not particularly. In fact, I didn't experience it as a spiritual kind of experience, a spiritual community per se. It felt much more cultural than anything, and so I really never gave it much thought, like in my meditation practice, and just as I dove into meditation practice and then Buddhism, it's like, okay, this is good. This is good. I'm enjoying this. I'm learning so much. I'm finally grounding. And then in the last couple of years, what's happened is like between some health issues that I've had, like chronic health issues that have just come, have just been ongoing, and trying to figure out what to do with that. It's like I've been touching into like, oh my gosh, there is so much more here that I didn't, like the generations of historical trauma, which I grew up in well-off circumstances with white skin privilege, and I've spent a lot of years working with that, and that's been great and all that. But it's like, oh, there's this other piece that is like the trauma I feel in my system is like just so much deeper than what I would expect based on the surface. And so it's like, oh, wait a minute, there's something else here. There's something else here. And so, it's like I've had to kind of look there and see, for example, with this chronic health conditions that I work with, I noticed, with autoimmune stuff, it's like there's this scientific idea that there's no cure, and so I've really had to, actually step back and be like, why is this belief that there's no cure like so immobile in my experience? And as I've kind of been practicing, like noticing, like, oh my goodness, I actually don't believe it's like there's a whole layer of like spiritual access that has been blocked for me. And that, comes out in part because of my grandparents, my great grandparents, who really fled like a religious, idea of Judaism with men and with beards, telling you what you couldn't do and shouldn't do and all of that. And it's like they left all that, but the problem is like the spirituality also got left in a way. It's like for me at least, this is just my experience as a Jew. I mean, no one else's experience, I don't know, but mine. But my experience was that my upbringing and my particular family, it was like there wasn't a depth of spirituality that I could see, and it got caught like science is real. You can't get better from this illness that you have. And so I've really had to step back and ask my ancestors to support me here. And so in the way that has kind of have really been has been most helpful is just literally asking my ancestors, like looking back as far as I need to from before the sense of trauma, before the sense of being in danger, all that this is, 1,000 years of being my heritage being in danger. It's like what I have had to reach back a long way and try to connect with that essence of what the spark of Judaism actually is. Like, what is this idea of God, that is, I've really had to step back and do that. And so that's just been a slow and, challenging process in certain ways. But like, oh, it's starting to feel like I'm able to sink back into my skin and into my body with the support of my ancestors and with the support of my own heritage. And so I work with that the best I can. Like I put little Jewish stars around my Tara and my Tara and my Buddha and all. Like sometimes I can't even deal with them because they're like idolatry, you know. It's like in my tradition that is a big deal. That's idolatry. And it's like on a bad day I can't do it. I don't want to do it. It's like, okay, I'm just going for straight mindfulness today, you know. And then other days it's like, no, I'm more grounded. I can hold it. So that's just a little bit about my practice. So I just I'm so thrilled to be able to have this conversation and the invitation from the lamas to like bring it, you know, like bring all of our pieces, because I don't want any of it left out, because I won't be any good to anyone or myself if I can't bring myself as a whole and bring my whole lineage with me, messed up as it might be and beautiful as it might be, all of that. It's like I want to bring it. So so that's what I want to say. And yeah, so I think now we're going to just turn this over to our next panelist, unless Lama Rod, you want to say anything before we move on?
No, that was beautiful, Lee. It was so beautiful. And, you know, I'll just say quickly to, you know, before we start, you know, introducing our panelists, you know, for me, you know, I grew up in the Black church. And so the Black church was so identified with, you know, the history of Jews, you know. And so for me, naturally, I grew up with the Exodus. So the book of Exodus in the Bible being like the most important like text within our culture, because it was always about the ways in which God was going to like deliver us, you know, from slavery first, from systematic racism now. Like God is always going to take us out this kind of experience of suffering. And, you know, and that was something that like was beautiful, but it was also, I also found myself wanting more. I actually wanted to be delivered instead of like always talking about getting delivered. You know? And that opened the door to Dharma, to Buddhism, right? I mean, that before that opened the door to activism and social justice. And then that opened the door to Dharma, because I'm obsessed with freedom. I'm obsessed with liberation in whatever form it comes, you know? And so getting into Dharma, experiencing some of that. But now in this point in my life, like I don't, you know, people are like, oh, you're a Buddhist. I'm like, that doesn't actually quite describe me anymore, you know, because I'm a little bit Christian, you know, I'm a little bit Hindu. I'm a devotee of the mother, you know, and I worship these Hindu, you know, gods now in my practice. And I study yoga, and I have a Swami, you know, and I have an ashram, and I have all this stuff, you know, including my Buddhist teachers, my Tibetan teachers, you know, and for me, that's creating this really rich cultivation and expression of something that fits me. You know, it fits me, and that's what I've struggled my whole life to get to, is to be in this place where I'm not afraid of exploring and asking questions and opening up to different practices and talking with the gods and the deities, and you know, it's just oh, this is like a more complete expression of what life is, you know. So I'll just say that, you know, and so just to move on to our panelists. So first, I think I'm just going to just ask folks to come up one at a time, and then I will introduce everyone. We have 4 panelists coming up, and they will come onto the screen, and they will offer, you know, 7 minutes-ish. You know, this is Bhumi Sparsha, so it's always an ish. It's like several ishes, ishes actually, ish. So first, I would like to introduce this up and coming legends. Siddhartha Jackson. And Siddhartha is a student of practice who lives in her body and vacations in her mind. Yes, Queen. She has a master's in theological studies from Harvard and indigenous traditions, and a master's in education from UMass in secondary English education and language arts. And she's trained in 200-hour Hatha yoga and therapeutics teacher. She works with healers, educators, activists, trainers, and mental health providers to end the relational and the structural violence impacting all marginalized bodies, practically Black and Indigenous bodies. So I would like to welcome the up-and-coming legends, Siddhartha Jackson, to the community. Yeah. And then we're going to get off the screen now to let you have the floor.
Well, to the bottom to thank you so much. I love you. Oh God, I love you. Thank you, Lee, for creating this space. So I want to say Kwewani to everyone. I'm Kitabanamish Nuchi Okisakakwani again, and Wani no Kishkuatuam. So I'm speaking in my native language, which is Nipmuc, and I've said good evening. It is such a beautiful day, and it's a beautiful day because we're all here. And although I can't see you all, I'm trying to put my feelers out to connect to you all through my heart across space and time. Yeah. So I guess I kind of want to start. I was thinking a lot about some of the questions around like my tradition and where Dharma fits in all of it. And one of the things that recently came up to my mind as I was thinking through these questions is how it's a privilege in some ways to be able to practice your traditions. And even how privilege to practice tradition is a kind of worldview. And I think it's a worldview that assumes that all traditions are to be shared with all people. And I say that because I have a few root traditions, much of which I've been practicing for the last 20 years, which is a little less than half of my life. Although I grew up around religion, my mom's religion, who was the family I was raised by, was Catholic. I didn't grow up in it, so I wasn't entrenched. Like the worldview didn't kind of seep in. I really, really loved Christ, and I really loved Mary, and the idea that the sacrifice, the idea of sacrifice for love and for people to be free was something that I loved. I didn't like a lot of the exclusionary kind of ways in which certain bodies had more access to love and freedom than others, female, queer, and so on. So I kind of meandered, I went to a Pentecostal church, and, by the time I was in middle school, I had a lot of Jewish friends. So I go to synagogue, and I was, I think I was just really open. And I think I was just open to anything that was going to help me suffer less. And about my early 20s was when I really started what I call like the thicker roots. So I do have thinner roots, like a tree, you have thin roots that like nourish you, and thick roots, and, they nourish you in different ways. And for me, the thick roots are the roots that I really fall back into, or to use the word in Buddhism, as I take refuge in. So the first is my indigenous practices. One of my blood indigenous heritage, which is Nipmuc. But that kind of extends, I think, to a lot of people who are here, which a lot of Native people call this continent Turtle Island. Because there are a lot of practices that are shared, whether they're ritual practices or relational to the world. And for us, the world is not just like the world's not just out there, it's everything that relies on one another. So when we talk about the earth, we're also talking about the sky, we're also talking about the birds and the waters, and so so that's one of my practices. And the other is an Ifa base, which is from the Nigeria, the Yoruba people. But I actually encountered around the same time that I think I encountered both Buddhism and yoga, which is my other traditions that I take refuge in. I'm a kind of I'm someone who's very revered to the deity Oshun, and she's the goddess of kind of the fresh waters. I can tell you a lot of stories about her, but if you wanted to know more, you can ask. And so those are the indigenous practices. And although Ifa is not of my blood family, kind of indigenous practice of this country, it really is about a relationship with the natural world and kind of understanding that. And a lot of it, does certainly, if you're kind of a priest or initiate, have a lot of language. But when you're kind of practicing it, and certainly I have, I'm a fire holder in the Mayan tradition, which my teacher taught, Juan Gonzalez, who's a daykeeper for the Mayan elders, has kind of allowed me to be and to carry fire and to keep fire, particularly around time of grieving and death. A lot of these traditions for me are just about things I do, things I do with my body, things that help me be in my body. And I think Buddhism, like I said, came around the same time as yoga. And yoga first came to me as the asana practice. And later, once I became trained, I really got to understand the 8 limbs and a lot of the history and the texts. But Buddhism in particular, and the Dharma, I appreciate what Rod had to say about the Dharma, is that how it holds all of this, Because for me, I felt like when I encountered Buddhism, which was first in a class, kind of a class in the study of Buddhist texts, and then also the kind of a mindfulness meditation, and they were both at the same time in the same place at UMass, I remember just feeling like, oh, that's it. Like, oh, like this is suffering. Like, this is not me. This is not, there's not something wrong with me, and there's something I can do, like there's a way out, And so for me, I think in some ways, like the ways in which words can help us articulate something, but also help us move through something, I felt like Buddhism was that for me. And yoga, I think, I love just like the basic building blocks of things. And so, yoga is a word that means like to bring things together, to yoke. And so for me, yoga was really about yoking all of my bodily experience, because, the things that really bring me to spiritual practice are, I want to suffer less, I want to bring more joy, and I want to be at home in this body and in these bodies, and when I say these bodies, like everything in which my body needs, which is of the natural world, of the human world, of the animal world, So, yeah, I'm just looking down at my notes. Oh, yeah. So I guess for me, like I get my practice because it's so much out of my need to be in what I call this earthen body. And for me, and we're all in earthen bodies, because anything that's of the earth, we need, I think we're living in a time where we have the opportunity to really see that, to really learn from that. And so I know that. And I think sometimes, and I think it's, again, because, I think a lot about particularly my ancestors of Native and not that I know my ancestors of African descent in terms of tracing that back, but I know a lot of history. I encountered Ifa in Cuba, and just understanding the history of people not being able to practice their religions because it was illegal, because it was seen as if it was something evil or dark. It was a threat, both politically, but also religiously, to the Catholic Church, but also to the political regime that was in Cuba before the revolution. And so I think a lot about that in terms of my responsibility to honor the ways in which those who kept those traditions were able to keep those traditions, And so, I think it's something that I am beginning to, kind of, open up in a way that honors both the fact that sometimes when you practice, you just have to do it and people might not get it, and I think sometimes if you keep doing it, people do. And then if you build relationship over time, with trust, you can start to kind of open up a little bit. And I guess I think about that too for, Native ancestors who, for hundreds of years in the establishment of this country, when colonization, was really settled here 400 years ago, up until, 1900s, the ways in which all of the ceremonies and, in some ways that, it breaks my heart because, I worked a lot in special collections and in the archives, and you see people's sacred objects or their ceremonies being transcribed, and that this actually is, it's not that it's secret, but it's sacred. And as I've understood sacred is that it kind of stays where it is. It's not that it's being kept from anybody, but it stays where it is. And so I think it makes it probably hard for people to understand, like, what my path is, that, and, I tend to be so, I think, coy about, what I am and what fuels me, but that's changing, I think. So I think that's all I'll say for now. I think I took more than 7 minutes or 5. But I can't.
I know.
That was 7-ish.
It was ish. Oh my God, Sister Sadada, thank you.
Thank you.
So much. It was so beautiful, always so beautiful.
Thank you.
Like, there's just like the way that you are, like, it's just, for me, it is an expression of the mother.
Thank you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. And can I comment on that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about that too, because I've been, struggling, like, coming into that. And I think some of the struggle for that is that, the other thing that brings me to spiritual practice is trauma, and not just like the trauma itself, like the response and I'm escaping trauma, but really wanting to heal it, but also wanting to, I'll use the Buddhist philosophy words, not have the causes and conditions that will make more trauma for me or anybody else like me or in my position. So I think that's also important too. That, and for me, I feel like that's for me where that sense of love pours from. Like, it's like the byproduct of burning through that trauma, burning through that pain, really doing that labor, and loving myself as I do it, and letting people love me.
You the last statement you made, I swear, like, letting people love me, that's a lifetime of practice.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
That's a lifetime of practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
And we're gonna have Sadada come back, at the end where everyone is going to be invited to ask questions, along with panelists too. Okay. So next, I would like to ask Rahil to come forward. So Rahil Rajani is a gender fluid queer South Asian Ismaili Muslim who has been exploring Buddhist practice and lineages for the last decade and loving where these two paths collide, which is everywhere. They are also a resident physician in Harvard's community psychiatry program, and they are dedicated to the intersection of social justice, contemplative practice, and somatic healing for collective liberation. So, Rahil, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. It's so good to be here in community with you and with all of you. Yeah.
Awesome.
I would love to actually just take 1 or 2 full deep breaths together. I'm a little unsettled myself from a week in the hospital. It's inviting us to come back into our bodies in the fullness of the breath. And our bodies resting on earth, always holding us, always supporting us. Our roots deep and interconnected. So I grew up Ismaili Muslim, and Ismailism is a small sect within Shia Islam. And this is my primary practice, my home tradition. And it's, as we've all had these deep, winding, fascinating paths, I have been incredibly lucky that my shifts have now come to a place where my Buddhist lineage practices and my Ismaili Muslim practices are so deeply intertwined. We use different words, but it is the same practice. Dharma is Dharma. Dharma is Dharma, wherever you find it, wherever it is. Growing up in the early years, I of course went to my place of worship at least 2 times a week, often a lot more than that. And that was in many ways ritualistically deep in my sense of being. I grew up in white suburban Florida, and I think I really got politicized and spiritualized, if you will, post 9/11. I was in 5th grade when 9/11 happened, and I think I had 2 choices: to either try to be as white as I could and blend in as much as I could, or to own the hell out of my faith. And I think I had too much ego to do the former. So I think that was a lot of identity formation and a lot of grasping and ego that went into that. And also it was really important in holding myself and grounding myself in community and in an identity amidst trauma and crisis. So in really owning my faith, yes, there's the surface level aspect of that, but I dove in, I really dug my heels in there and came to love and be really involved in my faith and my faith community. Part of what makes this event so beautiful for me is that my early work, my early politicization, my involvement in community organizing, and in collective liberation work actually started as interfaith work because I grew up Muslim in white suburban Florida post 9/11. So in so doing, my early high school work was interfaith organizing. So I entered Brown for undergrad as a religious studies major. And in my second semester, took a class on engaged Buddhism, how Buddhists like Thich Nhat Hanh in his lineage, how we engage in the world, how we engage in justice work, as Buddhists. And that was my first foray into Buddhism, where we had a lab component 3 times a week where we learned to meditate as part of the course. And there I was like, I'm done with this institutionalized religion stuff, with spirituality that I want. This is incredible. I'm diving into this, and ended up majoring in contemplative studies, which was a crossroads of spirituality, consciousness, music, neuroscience. So many, many different parts that sit, I think in some ways, religions for me that sit well outside of what we typically call religion. So what Lee is saying about, how can I be anything to anyone without bringing all of me, without being my full whole self with all of the parts? That resonated so deeply. So these were a taste, a foray into all of those parts. And college has its fascinating ups and downs. For me, in my experience, it meant pushing away my faith a lot. This ritual stuff, this prayer stuff doesn't work for me. I want to go drinking with my friends. That wasn't allowed in my faith. Explored and experimented with substances. And just really, I was fascinated by the spiritual aspect without the religious trappings as I thought that they were at the time. I didn't believe in a sentient God. So it was really hard for me to understand those pieces and mesh them with what I was understanding about Taoism and Buddhism and shunyata, emptiness, and like the interconnectedness of all things, and how that really just made such deep sense to me. There was one little nugget in that time where I saw an entrance, that a doorway that didn't quite open for many, many years, where the Muslim chaplain at Brown reminded me that amongst the mystical and esoteric traditions within Islam, all of what I'm saying is, of course, right? The 99 names of Allah. Actually, let's see. It's actually right there on my wall. The 99 ways written in Arabic that Allah is referred to in the Quran. And we notice that it includes the expander and the constrictor, the merciful and the punisher, the creator and the destroyer. So this whole idea of God good, devil bad, this dichotomy that I thought existed, he was trying to show me, like, Rahul, Allah is all of it. It is all of it. And I remember walking away with this sense of magic in me. And then that faded and fell off for a long, long time. And I really felt that my tradition was Buddhism. Started out Theravada and old school Buddhism, insight Vipassana traditions, and a lot of secular mindfulness stuff. Was working at the Center for Mindfulness for a little while after college, doing neuroscience of mindfulness research and using meditation to help people quit smoking. And so for me, I saw where science met with Buddhism, and I was really enamored by that. And over the next 10 years or so, really began to dive into multiple Buddhist lineages, now very particularly in a remade tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition that is mixed pieces of Dzogchen and Mahamudra and the indigenous Bon tradition in Tibet, and still with deep relationship to Theravada and Buddhism. Where it all came together was about a couple of years ago. I was pulled back into my faith community to facilitate for youth also struggling with this question of faith, and how do I make sense of the blind faith of my aunts and uncles and parents and grandparents, and it doesn't make sense. And they brought me on, and there's this strange way in which bringing me on to facilitate embodiment practices for Ismaili Muslim youth ended up allowing me to try and make sense, to work out these pieces. And by that time, I had begun to understand Dharma as Dharma. So when I began digging back into my faith, all I found was the obvious truth that, of course, these are the same. That the 99 names of Allah, that is deep spiritual practice. There's this central idea, the central idea of Tawheed in Islam, the oneness of all things. And that oneness is represented in that 99 names and holding all the dualities. That Islam is a non-dual tradition. And Ismailism, my small sect within Shia Islam, is very much about the esoteric aspects, the understanding, the deeper understanding rather than just the surface level meanings of what the Quran says. So I developed my own relationship with the 99 names of Allah. And one of the ways to practice that, one of the deepest spiritual practices in Islam is what's called zikr. Zikr literally means remembrance. For those familiar with sati, the Pali word for mindfulness, it is about remembrance. There's this idea of remembrance or recollection, right? So what is it we're remembering? And if we actually break down this word remember, yes, the opposite is forget. But there's another opposite of this word, is to dismember. The opposite of remember is to dismember, right? To recollect is to not collect, to have all the pieces spread out, to have all the pieces of ourselves not together. So this idea of union, of tawheed, is this process of remembrance, of bringing together. And that was part of coming back to religion, because religion in practice is re-L-I-G. It's etymologically to re-ligate, what does a ligament do? What does a DNA ligase do? It brings together. Religion at its core is about this union between human and divine, between each other, between ourselves in relationship to earth, between ourselves in relationship subject and object. All of that union, we begin to see that the borders that are enacted with great violence upon us actually don't exist, that we've constructed them, that we perpetuate our violence in this way. And what an unfortunately white Western way of thinking that has so deeply permeated the way I saw the world. So this was about internal liberation and external liberation being inextricable. Yes, there are borders out there, and we see how they've moved around people and caused people great harm. That money can move across borders, but people cannot. So what are these borders between subject and object? Similarly, right? These are the fractals of truth that began to make sense. That when we are in right relationship with ourselves, in Islam, the concept of justice is about being in right relationship. When we are in right relationship with ourselves, we are no longer imprisoning our own traumas and surveilling ourselves. So when we understand that, of course, we need to abolish the prison industrial complex, right? The ways that we surveil people and police people, the way that we imprison people, right? We do that in ourselves, and so we do it out there. So this relationship of bringing it all together allowed me to see these fractal pieces. In this practice of zikr, it's kind of like a mantra where you practice, where you over and over say this word, but it's more than just a word. When we say, for example, Ar-Rahman, the compassionate, how do we begin to embody that quality of Allah? You know, there's this paradoxical understanding of how dare we use one single quality to understand Allah, because of course Allah is all of these things. So we have to break that down and understand that it is all of these pieces. It is all the pieces together. But in so doing, we begin to internalize, bring in Ar-Rahman and embody that ourselves, right? And that is the practice of fanafillah, to annihilate ourselves into Allah. And that practice is actually not about annihilating self or ego. It is actually a truth of understanding that you are never separated from Allah to begin with, right? That we are never separate to begin with. And Tawheed is not actually union, the making of one, but the realizing of one, the understanding of non-dual truth. Ar-Rahman, compassion, and Al-Haq, truth. These are these two pieces, even in mindfulness, the two wings of wisdom, of understanding, seeing clearly, right? The unveiling, as Lama Rod often talks about, apocalypse, the seeing truth. And the Rahman, the compassion, the Karuna, the Metta. How do we hold that truth? How do we be in it and rest in it and trust in it, the way that earth is holding us up? And zikr is the polish for the heart, we call it, which is to understand that the gold is already shining. It is not to make the gold shine. In polishing it, we see that it is already shining. That is the truth of Dzogchen, to see that the sun was always shining. The clouds are there, and so we believe that they weren't shining. But once we move the clouds and we see more clearly, we understand that the sun was always shining. So Islam and Buddhist practice, Tibetan particularly for me, were becoming inextricable. What is non-dual truth? What is Tawheed? How do we annihilate oneself and realize that there never was a self that was separate? These are where these two worlds have come together for me deeply, truly. Yeah. And that the practice of faith, the rituals that I wrote off for so long, are actually ways of being in our bodies, to be present. Sajda, prostration, shoulder to shoulder with my ummah, my siblings. My sangha in Arabic is ummah, the understanding that we are all in community together, and physically our body is touching where we prostrate ourselves. That surrender, that letting go in Buddhism is surrender. Islam is to submit to the will of Allah, to understand that we don't have control and to relinquish that and move within that open space. So to begin to understand religion as a multisensory experience where I can smell the incense and taste the sukrit and do sajda, prostrating my whole body to Allah. It is incredibly deep truth to understand that the relative world, these rituals and these aspects of faith are in fact a reflection of the whole. That this is the Tawheed of bringing together the absolute and relative truths. Yeah, that's what's arising for me right now. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahel. This is so beautiful. And I'm just like, something that's always moved me about your practice is this commitment to justice and the ways in which you balance both justice, the work of justice, and also the spiritual realm, which is something that many people in our communities really struggle with. It's either one or the other for a lot of folks, but to bring both of those into union, it's a really tough place to sit and to practice from. And I think that you deeply embody that for so many people.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful to have teachers and books like you, teachers like you, and how truly radical Dharma was a splitting open for me of folks who are bringing those worlds together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And we'll have you back and just after our last presentations. So next, I would love to invite Karen Ziegler to join us on the screen. And and just to say this, I consider Karen one of my elders because for so many reasons, I just feel as if her work embodies a part of our community that her work, we talk about activism, spirituality, and bringing those two worlds together. I just feel like Karen has been at the forefront of that for decades now, beginning, particularly, with the AIDS epidemic, in New York in the 80s, and her work back then so deeply influenced me. And something I think about every single day right now is the theologies and the dharmas that have to come out of our creating a relationship with death and disease and dying right now. But Karen is a queer activist and ordained minister who has served as a pastor for an LGBTQ church in Greenwich Village for 10 years at the height of the AIDS crisis. She has studied meditation in the Vedic Hindu tradition for 20 years, and for the past 10 years has been practicing with Buddhist teachers. So I would love to introduce Karen to our community. And Karen, you are a part of our community too. You're a practitioner as well, too, with Buddhist Pasha. So
thank you.
Welcome.
I love you. Thank you. Such a deep honor to be part of this panel. I can't express what a great honor, especially hearing the other panelists and being introduced by Lama Rod. Great treat. So I tried to follow the prompts, and I'm gonna watch the time. But I, my first teacher, the first teacher that I took refuge in was Jesus. When I was 8 years old, I was reading the Bible, and it just captured me. And I read the Sermon on the Mount over and over and over. And when he said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and everything else will follow," I was like, okay, that sounds right to me. And talking to these very oppressed people, I didn't really understand the history then, but I understood he was talking to very oppressed people, outcasts, and you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world, and blessed are the poor, woe to the rich. All of that just captured me and still holds me, still really holds me. So I understood that to be the Dharma, and my definition for Dharma is truth. I ended up going to seminary, studying the Bible in the original languages, studying liberation theology, and those stories spoke to me so much. Thank you, Lama Rod, for talking about the Exodus. Thank you, Lee, for talking about Passover. That story of liberation is so rich, every single aspect of the story of Moses. And it's about inner and outer liberation. So I ended up pastoring this LGBTQ church in Greenwich Village. We were very young. We were children, really. And we felt like we were at the center of the universe. We were queer. We're here. We're queer. And we were exploring the Bible from the point of view of understanding that this was a community of Palestinian Jews who were colonized by the Roman Empire. And Jesus was very sneakily nonviolent and showing people how to act up. And we were learning how to be queer church. Like Good Friday, we would walk around Christopher Street and Greenwich Village, and we would visit the Stations of the Cross. Every Station of the Cross was a place where an LGBTQ person had been murdered. And all of our ritual was like that. It was queer people, it was intersectional, it was understanding our connection with other oppressed people. And into that, very shortly came AIDS. And for 10 years, we watched our friends, our closest friends, our community around us dying, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly and horribly. And we watched our local, state, and federal government be completely not happening. And we knew that a lot of people were really happy that a lot of gay men were dying. Gay men and Haitians was what we heard, And, at first we didn't even know it was a virus. We thought maybe it was the poppers, but then someone figured out it was a virus. And then we started trying to educate the community and started to act up. So for me to be a queer pastor in the midst of AIDS meant really calling on my queer activist roots and joining ACT UP. And death was a great teacher for us. What I saw with the young men who were dying was that many of them, I would even say most of them, were healing into their deaths. And there were gay men who said to me, I chose this. Some part of me chose this. They often felt that they were doing this work of dying and showing us what dying and healing and living on the edge of death was. They had a great sense of purpose sometimes, and we had a great sense of purpose because in the midst of all of that death, we experienced so much love, deep community, and it was also very hard. And it was our prayer, our meditation, our faith that got us through that time. So Good Friday, because it's Good Friday, I just have to say a word about Good Friday. Jesus was executed. James Cone wrote a book, The Cross, the Cross and the Lynching Tree, where he talks about the crucifixion of Jesus and lynching and how Jesus was essentially lynched, and the connection of those things. And, what happened with the crucifixion was these Palestinian Jews realized the depth of evil that the Roman Empire, that people who are hungry for power, who are greedy, there is no end to the evil of them. And that's, I think, what we're seeing now. And their beloved teacher, their beloved nonviolent teacher who was telling them, and they felt it among themselves, you are the light of the world. That loved one was lynched, was executed by these evil empire and the people among them who were trying to climb the ladder in the dominant culture. And yet, that community experienced profound resurrection, whatever that means, whatever that means. So one of the things we would say is Jesus did not die to save us from our sins. Jesus died to show people the truth about their leaders. And we experienced that truth during the AIDS crisis, and we're experiencing it now. And what happened to the early church, these little Jewish communities that were very, very persecuted by the Roman Empire, was that they began to share everything they had with one another. They had ecstatic, beautiful experiences of the Holy Spirit, which I'll talk about in a minute. That was what resurrection was. They said, we're not going to let death win. And the queer people who lived through the AIDS crisis said, we're not going to let death win. And we're going to stand up. We're going to stand up to these people. We're going to dump the ashes of our lovers on the White House lawn, just like people are dumping body bags on the front of Mar-a-Lago and Trump hotels and golf courses now. So that's the spirit of ACT UP, that silence equals death, that we all have AIDS, that we're all together in this. And that when one of us are oppressed, all of us are oppressed. We in our church had scriptures, the Hebrew, Greek, Old and New Testament, but we also had scriptures like Audre Lorde's writings, uses of the erotic as power was a powerful scripture for us. Now I realize it's the Satipatthana Sutta, really, and I'm very grateful that I was so schooled in that essay so many years before I met the Satipatthana Sutta. Toward the end of those 10 years, I was begging God for a meditation teacher because I had gone as far as I could, but on my own and with books. And the answer to my prayer was not the answer I wanted. I got a guru. I did not want a guru. I got a guru. I just knew she was the answer to my prayer. And I went to India. She was living in India at the time. And I kept going to India. And for 20 years, I studied in this, many people would call it a cult, still call it a cult, Siddha Yoga. And I realize now that it's a tantric practice. It's Hindu or Vedic Tantra. And I was at the end of all of that and working in the AIDS community for so many years. I was a dry sponge. And my experience of that practice, so many of the practices, well, just the very spirit of the practice and the community was that it was moisture. It was meeting the mother, for sure. Meeting the mother was my experience of it. And it's informed by Kashmir Shaivism, which is a really interesting theology, non-dual theology. Shiva, the sort of male creator god, but we are all Shiva. I am Shiva, you are Shiva. Nothing exists that is not Shiva. And then the female spirit, the spirit Shakti, the ineffable energy that is the Holy Spirit. I experience that exactly the same in my body and in my spirit as the Holy Spirit. I would have that same experience. So those practices of the mantra, the chanting for hours, the meditation, were so rich, and I'm so grateful for those experiences. And sometimes I think communities kind of spit us out. We're just ready to move on to the next thing. And one of the things that happened for me was I was having the kind of meditations where I was really spacing out, and I needed to study mindfulness because I was training as a nurse practitioner and I couldn't focus. So secular mindfulness helped me, and it led me to insight meditation and study of Buddhism. And I found there, and it took me a long time to figure it out, that I couldn't bring any of the things I just talked about. My experience was a little bit sit down and be quiet. And so when I read Radical Dharma, I can't express my gratitude for that book and for Reverend Angel and for Lama Rod, because I just got it. Yes, I must bring all of myself, all of these lineages, activism, Jesus, and this weird other thing that is so hard to explain to other people. So I thank you for listening, and thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much, Karen, for that. I just I just want to sit around and listen to you tell stories about the work during the AIDS crisis and the ways in which you all were creating theologies, like these liberatory theologies in the face of death and exclusion, and like the ways in which people back, they were just throwing people to the curb. They were like, this isn't,
Yeah.
we know those who study that period, like we know that. I mean, I was young in the 80s, but the ways in which the people who are getting AIDS, we don't need them.
Right. Oh, that was so clear.
Yeah.
And also it was God's punishment, and we deserved it.
Yeah.
That was big time.
Yeah. And even in the face of that, the ways in which love still became the teaching.
It was like the adversity increased the love.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also because we gave ourselves so much permission to be queer.
Yeah.
And as queer as we were.
Yeah. Yeah. We can go on and on, but thank you so much
Thank you.
The ways, and also I just want to thank you for the ways in which you embody eldership for me and so many others. I just want to honor, and just point that out for for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love you.
Thank you. I love you too. Yeah, we just want, so much of the spirit of Bhumi Sparsha is saying that, and we've said this over and over again, but we want, you have to bring everything into this, everything. That is your primary, spiritual practice, is to bring everything into this path, into this community. We can't work this out unless you're invited and called to bring everything into this, and there, people are gonna call that whatever, because many of us are surviving spiritual communities where we've not been allowed to be ourselves, and then we bring that trauma into communities, right? You keep. So often people reach out to me if I'm teaching a retreat or, doing something like that, and people email me and they say, oh, is it okay if I do this or that at the retreat? Is it okay if I practice this? And I'm like, of course, why wouldn't it be okay? And then people say, oh, the retreat center, they won't. And I say, fuck the retreat center. I'm the lead teacher here, I don't really care what the retreat center doesn't allow. I'm interested in your liberation, therefore I'm interested in the totality of who you are. Anyway, enough of my proselytizing. So next, And lastly, I would love to bring Ravi Mishra to speak with us, to sit with us. Ravi is and has been practicing in the Zen tradition for a decade and is a formal training student in the Mountains and Rivers Order Zen lineage. Social justice, which deeply inform his work. He's the founder of the Awaken app, featuring myself, as well as Reverend Angel, amongst others. And he also consults in software product management. It's awesome. Welcome, Robbie.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so much gratitude to you, Lamarad, for putting this together, for putting everything that you do together for all of us. I want to start by saying I am objectively two invitations. One is you're welcome to take a quick break. I'm objectively the least interesting and cool person that's going to be on today. So, you know, if you need to stretch, go to the bathroom, this is your time to do it. But beyond that, just starting off, I think my path is really about my work, my play, my body, my life. My work is my play, and my play is my life. And it's a constantly evolving question of how deeply I can be in my body, how deeply I can get out of my own way. I was born in India and grew up in Silicon Valley, and those are those two sort of polarities of my life. Born in Kanpur, which is in Uttar Pradesh in India, which I think when I was born probably was the most polluted city in the world, and I think it's still in the top 5. And I was only there for a few months before my parents moved, and then I grew up in Silicon Valley, which has probably experienced the largest inflow of wealth in human history, and was constantly, every few years would go back to India and always had a taste of what it was like to be in one of the poorest cities in one of the poorest states in one of the poorest countries. And I think so much of my life and my path is figuring out how to straddle those two worlds. So I grew up with Hinduism. I was introduced to the Mahabharata and the cultural Hinduism at a cultural level, not really at a spiritual level. My parents were sort of culturally Hindu, and that was really it. But they planted seeds. They planted deep seeds, encountering the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata. Since then, I've been called into Zen. I started practicing when I was in college about 12 years ago, and you know, I think this mixing of worlds and this being between worlds is sort of the defining aspect of my spiritual life and my life as a whole. Sitting at the intersection of so many different places and people and ways of seeing and experiencing the world. One of the most fun things right now is a partner and one of my best friends once gave me a figurine that she had 3D printed that had a Yoda body, a Yoda head on the body of a Buddha. And right now, I recently moved and don't have all of my spiritual accoutrement. And this figurine has always been on my altar, but now is in a central place. So when I meditate, when I bow, it's always right in front of me. And I think it's a really interesting symbol of my life. You know, I have come into Eastern practice through white folks, through its projections onto the West, through Star Wars, amongst many, many, many other Western stories, as well as, you know, the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita and some of the Eastern and Indian traditions as well. And you know, how I incorporate it all together, which is one of the questions, is like, it's really a moment by moment thing for me. Right now, and by the way, it's gotten a little bit windy. I want it to be outside. If it's too windy, just let me know. Okay, just checking the chat to make sure it's not. You know, I think the answer of how to incorporate all these things together, I don't really know. It's really a moment by moment, a day by day thing. When I'm in India, I've had the good fortune of spending chunks of time there in my life. I find myself praying a lot. When I'm in Brooklyn, where I lived until recently, I find myself practicing bare breath meditation. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer. This is, again, why I'm the least interesting person you're going to hear from today. But it's really a day by day thing. Some days I have to bow, some days I have to sit, some days I have to stretch. And most of the time I don't even really know what I need. And that's, if nothing else, that's the core of my practice. Because for me, you know, and one of the other questions here is, how does the Dharma fit into all of this? And to me, Dharma, truth or teachings, it both transcends all of the traditions that have taught me so much. Hinduism, Zen, Tibetan Buddhism, Islam. I loved so much of what Rahul and everyone else said. But as an Indian, I'm deeply connected to the tradition of Islam, and the Dharma is transcends it, is the foundation of it. It's not owned by anyone or anything, and it's the core of everything that I am trying to cultivate in my life. That is, how do I understand this reality? How do I understand myself? How do I understand my work? How do I understand my life? And what does that mean about how I want to show up in this moment, today, this week, this month, this year? How can I use this body to liberate myself and all beings? And not in an intellectual sense, not in a way where it's something that's strategic, but in a way that's here and now and constantly changing. I think maybe the hardest part about this, and there's an interesting question that is ended here, that is the last question we were posed, which is, how do others see your path and chosen practices? And I think that one of the hardest parts about practicing for me is that being misunderstood, or being not misunderstood. You know, sometimes it feels like I don't really have a home. The reason I've gravitated so strongly to people like Lama Rod and many of the other people who you've heard from today is that I think there's a resonance about the desperation and the aliveness of practice. I mean, I go to sleep every day yearning for freedom, and I wake up every morning the exact same way. And it honestly is kind of hard for the people that are closest to me, because I don't know if any of them get it, and I just think I'm annoying most of the time. And yet, I think part and parcel of my privilege of having been able to leave Kanpur, India, and to grow up here in San Francisco Bay Area and experience life and have the opportunities that I've had, is that I'm not going to turn the back on the people who were already in my life. You know, I dream about joining a monastery all the time, but it's just not what this body is cut out to do. And so, I don't know. How do others see my path and chosen practices? I don't know. I think mostly they think I'm a crazy person. And I think that navigating that is one of the most intense and amazing and fun and horrifying and sad challenges. And yet I'm grateful because of people like Lama Rod, because I wake up every morning excited to find the middle path. What is the middle path today? What is the middle path in the next hour, in this moment? So I'll shut up. I had a timer set, and the wind caused me to not hear it, but thank you all.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you. Thank you. I just appreciate the way that like you're just like adapting and changing and just saying, this is what I need. every day, and the way it's just like, yeah, this is what I need. I don't really care about what other people say or think,
Well, people like you are you in particular give people like me faith and strength in that practice.
I mean, that's what I get paid to do. I'm a professional, so. And it's also people like you, honestly, who make me accessible in different ways, in different platforms, in different technologies. So absolutely, it's like vice versa here. You live in your practice.
That's all we can do.
Yeah. So yeah, I just want to thank all our panelists for being on board here. And now we're gonna do this thing. So we're gonna invite all 4 panelists to come back onto the screen. Well, we're gonna figure this out. So first of all, as we're setting this up, if you have questions, right? So feel free to put those in the question box in the questions. And there's just like 2 questions already. Okay, so feel free to populate that box. Okay, and then we're gonna just kind of be rotating our panelists in and out because I don't think I won't have. Well, none of us will have a mic. Lee and I won't have a mic or anything if we're not on the screen. So one of us will be on the screen at a time with 3 other panelists posing questions and so forth. Okay, so if you have a question for someone in particular, please place that in the questions. Okay. Okay. So let's do this. So maybe I'll just start then. So maybe we'll go with this first question and lead to, if you can help with this question. So is there a way we can discuss the ways in which Good Friday has historically been a day of anti-Semitic oppression for Jewish people? This is not causing problems. So maybe we'll start with that question.
I'd love to talk about that for a few minutes.
Okay.
If you think about the people who are being executed now or lynched now, and who is it that's doing that? It was the Roman Empire when the Jews were occupied in Palestine by the Roman Empire, and the Romans demanded that the Jews worship the emperor, and they refused. So Jesus represented a great threat to their domination in much the same way we see certain leaders be threatened by anyone who will not worship them. So it's understandable why the Roman Empire felt that they had to execute Jesus. The part about the Jews came in because when you think about it, there are people among us, maybe queer people, maybe people of color, maybe Buddhists, who are trying to suck up to the Roman Empire right now, who are climbing the ladder, who are thinking that they can, get rich if they are on the side of the dominant culture. So of course there were people like that among Jewish people at that time. There always are going to be people who find money and power more important than anything else. And the Christian scriptures were written many, many years after the actual stuff happened. So, what you're reading in all this stuff about the Jews killed Jesus, it's nuts. It has nothing to do with what happened historically, except the thing that I just said. And it's just resentments that served somebody. And so somebody was feeding them those resentments. I mean, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to add that, so regardless of whether it's been right or wrong, you know, the impact for Jews, of course, is there. Like, it hasn't been, I mean, there is violence, there is hatred, there is, I mean, I'm not, you know, I wish I knew more about the specifics of what happens and what has happened, but I know that, you know, Good Friday historically has been an especially dangerous time for Jews, regardless of the rightness or wrongness of people's understanding. I mean, that is the, you know, that is true, and I think it's really important to, yeah, acknowledge that's part of the experience, and that's part of, I think, you know, it wasn't specifically Good Friday I was thinking about, you know, when we conceived of this particular panel, but it was this idea that, you know, there's, you know, it's like, yeah, yeah, you know, Christianity isn't always the safe place for Jews. It isn't, you know, and it just, it's different people's experiences are so different based on where they grew up and their families and all kinds of things. As you know, speaking as a Jew, and I can't speak for anyone else, but I just know that people have so many different experiences, and it's just important to acknowledge that too. And thank you, Karen, so much for giving the historical context of why that shouldn't be. But, you know, unfortunately, it's been like that too. So thank you. Whoops, can't hear you, Karen. I think you're muted.
To remember, Constantine was converted to Christianity. So Christianity became the dominant culture. So, you know, if Christianity is the dominant culture, it's not Christianity anymore. And so the dominant culture is always going to bludgeon people, gay people, anybody who it's convenient to bludgeon. I hope that makes sense.
Quickly, that part of the work that we're having to do is to work through the trauma around religion and spirituality that many of us have grown up with, you know, and the continued violence around religion that we still continue, you know, to individual experiences as experiences of communities that we're part of, you know. And this is the work for me that Dharma has been able to do, to work with like the trauma that I've experienced around kind of growing up Christian, you know, and in a context that was very anti-queer. And I would argue, this is a discussion for some another time, but like though I grew up in the Black church with Christianity, I inherently felt that Christianity was anti-Black as well, in the ways that it was transmitted to slaves as a system of repression and control for my ancestors. So,
it's everything. Like any tradition, it can be liberative or it can be oppressive. Buddhism too.
yeah. Uh-oh, Lee, turn on your mic.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Just reading Nathan's comment about acknowledging the collective history of trauma that Ashkenazi Jews carry around in bodies. Oh yes, bodies. Yeah. Trauma in bodies. Yeah, I can just relate to that. We each have to unpack, and yeah, I guess we can all talk about that as well. So thank you. Thank you. So I wonder if we want to go on to another question.
Hmm?
Like, I don't know if we want to, let's see. Siddhartha, maybe we can do Siddhartha's question. Can you share some of how your connections with Oshun, Ifa, and the Dharma intersect? Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've always enjoyed uh, kind of devotional practice, ritual practice of deities, because it gave me a way to understand, embody in someone's life what the action of the work is, whether it's love or generosity. I began in Buddhism encountering female deities through Kuan Yin. That was my first encounter, and that some, like a, for me, a real person, historical person who can transform through their own actions of labor to then become a whole embodied service was like, what? Like that is like, that's magic. And I like magic. I really do. I like the magic of healing. I like the magic of like change. And I like the magic of love. And so that like gave me a template, and I think, obviously not obviously, you might not know, I danced for a lot of time and I did theater. And for me, like, it's almost like you become possessed of that thing, And so for me as a dancer and for me as an actress, I always felt I was being possessed by whatever it was I was doing, whether it was dancing, folkloric or modern, whether it was acting, the importance of being Ernest or Macbeth, that I was really putting my whole body and and for me, my body includes my mind and my emotions, and I was pouring myself into that to be transformed, to be taught. And then when I came to learn and practice and become really irreverent with Oshun, not as a priest, I'm not initiated in that way, but I am a daughter of Oshun. Like that was a ceremony, that was, a process. And that began to teach me, because with the Orisha, I think similar, like Kuan Yin, Rod introduced me to Tara. And so she's someone I've really been working with in these last few years. But there's something about the quality of what it is that they're embodying that teaches you how to heal, how to be, how to love. Shun and Ifa Santeria is interesting because there are many attributes. So it's almost like you're learning about the life of, or they call them roads or caminos in Spanish. So like these roads of Oshun that are kind of their instructions about kind of what can happen when and what can happen when you don't, and you learn from them, and then, there are aspects of, things that that are characteristic or that she's known for that, you get to have relationship with, and you learn, you grow, you shed the things that cause you harm and cause the world harm, So for me, I guess they're right there, they're right there together. But I think what I love about deity, particularly female deity practice, because I think as a Black presenting woman who's also Native, in a very particular context around skin color, and body type and what it means to be a woman, it's often hard to embody and to show up and be my full self, you know, and to have a template, you know, to have a life example, you know. I mean, it's like it's like, oh, I don't have to figure this out myself, you know. I'm not alone, you know, not alone. So I hope that answered your question.
And as we're continuing, I really encourage everyone to continue using the chat area too, to have discussions and everything. That's really a good thing that we can do as well. Oh, so that went away.
So Lorena has said, I'd love to hear about, oops, we got Siddhartha back?
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I think there was, I don't know. Maybe I closed the chat, but I opened it. I think Sean had asked something about like skin color and how it shapes our practices. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, I'll definitely talk about it. You know, anti-Blackness is something that is, you know, first and foremost, it's painful. It enters me as a pain that I feel in my body that makes it hard for me then to encounter the thing that that I either need or I want, you know. You know, I've certainly been in spaces, you know, whether they're spaces of you know, both Ifa, Santeria, as well as Native American practices where, you know, being darker skin, having the hair texture I have, you know, kind of says something to people about what I can and cannot access, who I am or who I'm not. But I think also about my right to be able to participate in particular ceremony or ritual. And you know, obviously that's a byproduct of colonization and whiteness. You know, two really violent systems that are really, you know, not allowing people to access to their ancestral practices. You know, and myself included. You know, and so yeah, navigating that sometimes is more hard than others, but it is very real, and I think it's something that, again, I think this idea of privilege in the practice, I think, is also part of that privilege, right? That some people have access to being able to practice something because of how they look or who they love or, you know, what they're willing to do to get power.
You're muted.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, you got it.
There it is.
Why it was showing it was working, but it wasn't. So just saying thank you to Savannah. And also just, you know, I was thinking too about the question here. It's saying how our practices are interpreted by talk about skin color and how that shapes how our practices are interpreted by others, but also just, you know, thinking of, you know, as a person who doesn't present as a person of color, I also, but I can have a sense of like the places where I doubt my own self, or like the doubt that my own access or something, like that internalized sense of others' expectations defining somehow what's accessible. So I wondered if there's anything else you wanted to speak on that. If that's not feeling right.
I mean, I think, I think about the gaze, I guess, the gaze of other people and how that can really interrupt, what feels to me like a very intimate, and intimate doesn't necessarily just mean one-on-one, but I think like a very internal, brought out practice, that I think can be almost interrupted by somebody gazing or policing sometimes, whether or not you're worthy to practice, or you're worthy to be this thing, or you have, you can be this thing, but in this way. This is kind of another kind of way of doing that. Like you can come as a guest, but you're not really welcome into the circle to practice. It's that kind of, I call it a kind of pushing away. I've certainly experienced that. That you can't be in here, and there's a way in which people are creating a kind of violence within something really sacred. So yeah.
And our deep intention to not do that in this really special space. No, we might, but just thank you. Yeah, there's some questions about Passover and Easter and other traditions related to apocalypse. And there's another question about remembering the Exodus as an act of remembrance. Oh, interesting. Okay, so these are two different questions. I was thinking they might be overlap. Maybe we should just do, I don't know, we've got a few more minutes, so maybe we can start with the question about traditions related to apocalypse. If anyone wants to speak to those.
Rahil, you want to come up and speak a little bit, and then I can get off of the screen too to get more people up as well. To Alex, I'm just taking up space.
Yeah. I know the irony of you trying to step off the screen when it's that apocalypse. Really?
I see it's not happening, so I guess I have to stay here.
This is an interesting one for me because actually I can't really speak to it from a tradition of Islam, or at least in a very limited way. But bringing all of me in this space also means speaking to it from whatever tradition I have and hold. My understanding of apocalypse, like, yes, there's the day of judgment, and I think that kind of crosses over with many of the Abrahamic traditions, right? The understanding of the trumpets blowing and this being it. It's not the 11th hour anymore, right? Actually, I have a Hopi elder speaks right now, right next to me. You've been telling the people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people that this is the hour. And there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth, create your community, be good to each other, and do not look outside yourself for the leader. convenient that's right there. I've been thinking about apocalypse a lot. And right now, the tradition that I'm speaking from is that of being drafted as a psychiatry intern back into medicine, and being in what feels like a war zone in the community hospital, taking care of coronavirus patients right now, amid wearing an N95 for the whole day, these one-time use things. And the only thing that hurts more than my heart right now is the fucking bridge of my nose, because no one tells you how painful those can be. And single-use gowns that we're passing as they tear and rip in paper. This is apocalypse. And to bring in the wisdom of Lama Rod, etymologically, apo and calypto, to uncover, right? So we are unveiling. This is the truth seeing, and these are the practices that ground us. And the practices, the practices are there to ground us. These practices of mindfulness are also a practice in the unveiling, right? If we look at our experience like a circle and we cut a line across it, all of our experience is here, but that which is above the line, as Tara Brach often talks about, is what is conscious, right? So how do we make the unconscious conscious, right? This is the practice of mindfulness, being in our bodies and uncovering, unveiling what is here and present for us, right? We do talk about veils in Islam a lot, that the ayat, which are the parts of the Quran, the surahs are the chapters, and then within that are the ayat, the verses. Those are the signs of God. And yet each of these signs, these ayat, are the veils. And through the lifting of the veils, we begin to see truth, which again, then is the fact that all of these veils are nothing other than Allah, right? So what are we unveiling in this moment? We are unveiling in my hospital with mostly Black and brown, low income immigrant folks speaking Creole, Spanish, and Portuguese, right? We are unveiling that it is hitting them harder in my community hospital. We are unveiling the absolute need for universal health care. We are unveiling that Rikers, with its higher rate of coronavirus per capita than any other city or country in the world right now, we are unveiling the truth that we already knew, that we are seeing clearly now, that prison abolition must happen, that we need to get people out of cages, that we need to be liberating all of us, right? So for me, my practice right now in unveiling is seeing clearly what's happening here. We are also unveiling, I will say, we are also unveiling, thank you, whoever shared, I believe that must be the Hopi prayer. We are unveiling how we're ready to take the economy back before our elders come back, right? That we'd rather sacrifice our elders to bring the economy back. Not only does it show capitalism, that also shows the relationship in white Western America to elders, right? To our ancestors and to those who bring wisdom to us, that we don't care about them, right? America is so quick to forget its history. And yet amidst it all, we are unveiling the power of organizing. We are unveiling the power of connection and community and Dharma Sangha in this practice right here, right? Shared practices and shared wisdom. This is the unveiling also of the truth of liberation together. Yeah, that's what apocalypse is for me right now. This is it.
Amen. Can we? Oh, go ahead, Lee.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I just Ravi is like, so Ravi and I have done a dialogue about the apocalypse, actually, which will be in Love and Rage in my next book. So we printed that out as a dialogue. And I'm just kind of laughing thinking about that dialogue. So I would love Ravi at some point to come up and talk about the apocalypse as well. But I'm sorry, go ahead, Lee.
I was just, thinking about just appreciating so much what Raheel was saying, and it's just helping me reflect as well. And just, with my own Jewish tradition, the apocalypse has been so many times over and over and over. And so also just being so aware too of just what we're talking about now, of like what else emerges? Like, what else emerges? Like the resilience, the depth of love, all of these pieces, which are there. It's already, we're all feeling that already. Like, how much has dropped away in these last few weeks, where it's like there's no space for, not the space for judgment that there once was, because it's like, okay, we gotta love right now. So anyways, Ravi.
Yes.
Well, it's funny you mentioned our conversation because my memory of it involves me asking you a lot of questions and not having a lot of thoughts myself. The apocalypse. I mean, so part of my perspective, part of my positionality is I've really, I grew up in a pretty secular place in the Bay Area, California, and I was rooted in the traditions of India. And I'm still like low key pretty confused by Christianity and Judaism, like just as general concepts. So that's the background for any thoughts or non-thoughts I have on the apocalypse. I guess I would just say, God, it's hard because I hate sounding like a Zen cliche, but it's always ending. It's all, the world is always ending in every moment. It's been ending. I mean, and this is part of where, again, and it's interesting how much this conversation brought me back to the paradox of navigating just my life day to day of being an Indian person who feels rooted in India and also feels rooted in the Bay Area. But, the apocalypse has been happening in India for so many years. I went to this play recently in San Francisco that was about, it was one of those like acid trippy plays that started off as a rained out cricket match between the Indian and British women's cricket teams, and sort of like acid tripped into like 1804 colonized India. And the playbill had all this information about the famines stuff. I mean, I'm not an India history person, but I'm a history person, and I did not understand the depth of ravage that the British, that the East India Trading Company did to my motherland. And it was the apocalypse when I was 6 years old on the train platform in Delhi, and there were hundreds or probably 1,000 plus people living there, and that was normal. So it's certainly different. My day-to-day is different. Our days are different here in the West, in the US, wherever we are. And the day-to-day in India is different too. But my only humble contribution would be, it's always been the apocalypse. It's always been, everything is ending in each moment. And everything is also beginning. And I had a really hopeful call with a friend and ally and organizer today who was just very optimistic that we were going to come out of this, and it was infectious. And I hope we are collectively working to, in whatever our lane is and whatever lane we want to be, to figure out a way through. But Lamarad, what do you think?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about the apocalypse. As someone who for the past year and a half has been teaching about the apocalypse to very deaf ears around me, as a pioneer in the Buddhist world around apocalypse and Dharma, and it's documented. So we talked about the Kali Yuga, right? When we talked for the dialogue. And for me, I see the Kali Yuga as a cycle. I don't see an end to anything, but I do see a cycle. I see a cycle moving into more confusion, more darkness, more death, more disease, right? But then it moves out, right? And then, of course, there are so many different ways to understand Kali Yuga, right? But that's like the one that like really works for me. It's like we're moving in and we're going to move out, right? I just think that, when I was growing up in church, the apocalypse was all fire and brimstone. And as I got older, I was like, that sounds way easy. Like get it over with. destroy everything in one swoop. Oh, that's great. Let's do that, you know? And what I know now is that the universe doesn't do easy.
Hmm.
You know, like this is like, it's not about, this is an opportunity for us to get free. Right. And that's how I understand my Dharma practice. Every single thing that I get is something that I can transform into wisdom, but it's going to be hard as fuck. You know, and I think that's the Kali Yuga. It's like the darker you get, the harder the stuff is going to get to do, but it's not impossible, you know, but we have to work harder, you know, as this phrase that I've been using, hold tightly, gently, you know, it's like, it's so coming up for me right now. In my practice, like I'm just holding on to my sources of refuge, but I'm not overdoing it, you know? So that's it, you know, that's like my thing about the apocalypse, and not everyone's going to make it, you know, and that's what we have to learn. Huh?
You always say that.
Yeah,
every time I'm always like, ooh.
That's, you know, and not everyone's going to make it, you know. And Lama Justin and I, and we're going to start closing up now because it's past 9, but Lama Justin and I were just on pilgrimage in India last month, you know, when everything was really setting off around the virus, you know, and then we were getting calls from here, like to come back early, you know, and we were just really contemplating, and you know, and one of the things that we started talking about was, of course, death, right? You know, like, are we ready to die, right? Like, if we contract the virus, like, are we ready, you know, to die, you know? And that was something that, like, we felt very strongly that we were ready, you know? So when I talk about not everyone's going to make it, Lama Justin may not make it, you know, and that's okay because he is ready to move on, you know? In the same case with me, if I get sick, I am ready to move on, you know? And that's what these are the questions that we're being brought to right now. It's like, am I ready to die? You know, can I actually let go of this body and this life and move into, you know, another life, you know, another whatever existence, you know? If we don't do this work, this deep, intense, overwhelming contemplation, we're gonna waste this time, you know? And so yeah, maybe all this ends and you made it through, but you've missed this opportunity if you haven't done this contemplation. You've missed a really rare opportunity to face death in the space, to face death in its face right in front of you, you know? So this is exactly why I get the label of being like evangelical and like, you know, and proselytizing all the time, because I don't know what's happening to me, literally. Okay. So as we wrap up, we could go on forever. Like, this has really been so rich and intense. This has been recorded. This is going to be available. Just give us a little bit of time to get this edited and up on the website. But this will be available. Please, you know, if you have a little extra spare change, please donate. And tonight we want to make the donations available to our panelists. So you'll get a donate box. They'll pop up. So we're going to make these donations available to our panelists. And I just want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Siddhartha, Rahil, Ravi, Karen, for being with us and for sharing the space. I've never experienced really anything like this in the Dharma world. So, and I'm usually creating shit and just doing shit that no one's ever done and seen before. So this is a new one for me, even. So thank you all for all the panelists. The panelists, before you go, everyone, the panelists, if you want to just pop in some details, just your websites, social media handles, just so you know people can follow you and stay connected. That would be wonderful. Lee, you have any closing words?
Oh, I'll just say from the bottom of my heart, just so much gratitude for everyone for being here, the questions, the panelists, for Lama Rod for being like, yeah, let's do this crazy thing and making space for it. And most of all, just appreciating the breadth of path that is like essential for us in a way, available, essential, and maybe not. Like maybe, something if it feels too open, too wild, fine. That's good too. Like finding something that's a little more traditional is also good. It's like, I know that I heard Lama Rod say the other day, like, I just want people to practice how they want, and I love that. So yeah, so just much gratitude.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. We will be back. Tomorrow is our day of rest on purpose, just because we've been going full steam this week with all the programming. And though we will be back on Sunday with our 2 o'clock study group, studying the text, as well as our 6 p.m. Introduction of the Heart of Matara, which is a new Tara practice that we'll be offering in just a 2-hour session. Please continue to stay connected to us on through our website. Social media presence is coming at some point in life for us. But please continue to stay connected, tell people about us, and we're just going to continue moving on with everything. So just quickly, just dedicating the merit. I just dedicate the merit of our time together again to all beings, to that we all may experience the deepest well-being, happiness, and joy. May we all experience liberation. May we all have what we need in order to feel deeply fulfilled in the practices we choose to engage in our lives, and may we continue to hold each other tightly but gently as we move through this darkness and through the struggle. May we all just be free one day from all of this as quickly as possible. That's it. All right. Thank you, everyone. That's it. Love you.